Hi, everyone. You've got Jim Campbell here. It is at the top of the hour, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Looking at the attendee list, it looks like we have people joining as we speak. We could give them a few more seconds, but I'm joined by Tom Utley from the Arctic Wolf team and Steve Hall from the Arctic Wolf team. We're appreciative of you joining the webinar. We hope you find it productive and beneficial. Just a little housekeeping. There is a Q&A box on the right side of your screen. We are going to, if you have questions, please submit them to the box. We will address the questions towards the end of the webinar, just so we could kind of keep on pace, since we have a lot to cover in the hour. But as I just mentioned, the Q&A box should be on the bottom right of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions and we'll address them at the end. Just to get started, again, my name's Jim Campbell. I'm one of the managing partners at Opkalla. Today we are going to talk about Tales from the Trenches with Arctic Wolf. So taking a look at some of the security breaches in 2021, and frankly, how you can protect the organization and how Arctic Wolf might help you there. So with that said, I will click to the next page. Thanks, Tom. So just for those who don't know Opkalla, if you've never heard of us or know who we are a organization that has grown and is a little bit of a differentiator in the market. We like to kind of go to market with our customer base a little bit differently. We act completely agnostic and customer centric in terms of our areas of expertise. You could see them in front of you: collaboration, network, whether that's connectivity, SD-WAN, mobility, security, as you can imagine, as we're going to talk about today. But probably our largest business unit today is security, and helping customers improve their cybersecurity posture. Data center and cloud, for folks either looking to move to a hybrid cloud or potentially move workloads into the public cloud. Those are conversations we have every day. Data center maintenance, which is offering an alternative to OEM maintenance for your data center infrastructure. And then lastly, we have a strong Microsoft presence as a CSP cloud solution provider. So outside of the Arctic Wolf piece, we would love to engage with you. And just so you know, and I'll repeat this at the end of the webinar, all the attendees and even registrants will see an email come from an Opkalla resource or an Opkalla salesperson within probably 24 hours of the webinar. That's going to include the recording of the webinar in case you want to pass it along to other colleagues or peers. But it's also going to have a call to action. We would love to talk to you more specifically about your environment, learn a little bit more about what you do for those who don't engage with us today. So with that said, I'm going to hand this off to Tom Utley, who will discuss the agenda and kick us off. But again, for any questions, please wait till the end. And thank you all for joining. We're excited to have you attend.
All right, thanks a lot, Jim. So yeah, as Jim said, my name is Tom Utley. I'm a senior pre-sales systems engineer for Arctic Wolf, and I work here in the Carolinas. And I'm joined with a colleague of mine, Steve Hall, who is also a systems engineer for Arctic Wolf. And we are basically going to cover a few things about just sort of cybersecurity in general, as well as how Arctic Wolf can help. And then we're going to end up with some recent security wins from within the Arctic Wolf Security Operations Center. So in order to just kick off here, I want to do a quick intro to Arctic Wolf, and then we'll talk about some of the recent security incidents in the industry as a whole, and talk about and try to overlay how Arctic Wolf can help in those situations. So just to begin, Arctic Wolf is a security operations company. Looks like I jumped ahead here on accident. Sorry about that. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties getting to the next slide here. It looks like we're having difficulty getting to the slide that I'm trying to show. Are you guys
Which one are
seeing
you trying to
any
get
cyber
to?
risk? What'd you say?
Yeah, I see that. Yep, I see end cyber risk. That's right.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. Arctic Wolf is a security operations company that is focused on the 24/7 monitoring and analysis of your IT environment. We built really a world-class security operations center and we have over 250 engineers across our different locations. And we serve many customers. We serve over 2,000 customers, and we basically perform all of the standard functionality of the security operations center on behalf of these customers. So, our goal as an organization is to end cyber risk, and we think that the way to do that is with effective security operations. The main idea here is that cyber risk has two components. One is, what is the likelihood that you're going to suffer a cyber attack, and especially a successful attack that has damaging consequences? And how can we reduce that likelihood? The second factor of cyber risk is, what is the amount of damage that an attacker could do? When it comes to the data loss or the remediation efforts that would take place, what is the total monetary value of the damage that an attacker could do? And so if you take those two factors and combine them together, that's how you end up with your cyber risk. And our goal at Arctic Wolf is to help you minimize that as much as possible, driving towards continuous improvement and getting that down to zero. So I'm going to see if I can go to the next slide here. I'm not sure if it's going to work. So I'll talk about more details of how Arctic Wolf does that in just a minute. But I want to start off by just sort of highlighting some of the recent security incidents that we've all heard about in the news. And so I'm sure you've all seen the headlines and read the articles about some of these incidents, and I'll try to get some detail into what happened and how it came about. But I want to start with an example of how these things are covered in the news. This is sort of a rhetorical question. Is this really how security incidents happen? You see the timeline, and on the left there, we've got, nothing happened. And then a few weeks later, nothing happened. And then eventually there's a massive breach. It just pops up out of nowhere, as if there was no, indicator beforehand that something bad was about to happen. And we all know that, once you actually dig into these incidents and look at the timeline of what happened, it's usually much more complicated than that, and there's usually many opportunities along the way to detect the intrusion and to prevent the execution of the attack. And so that's what we're going to get into here. So the first example here is a water treatment facility in, near Tampa Bay, Florida. And this is, this happened just before the Super Bowl, which was down in Tampa Bay this year. So this could have been a really severe incident. What happened, in summary, was an attacker broke into the water treatment plant control computer and changed the chemical balance of the sort of processes in the treatment of the water supply. And if those changes would have gone through to production or to the actual delivery of the water, it would have been a poisonous level. It would have ended up in deaths of residents. And so the way that this happened was essentially a bad security practice. The water treatment facility was using TeamViewer to manage multiple computers within their installation. They installed TeamViewer, and they used one set of admin credentials that they reused across all of the different machines that they were able to access. So the attacker was able to get access to the TeamViewer account. That could have been a phishing incident, or maybe they found it on the dark web. But one way or another, they got access to that TeamViewer account. And then they were able to find the critical control system and log into that and start making changes. Now, it just so happened that, while they were in there making those changes, there was a plant operator that was sitting in front of the machine and watching the screen. And he saw the mouse moving around, the mouse cursor moving around, and, sounded the alarms like, hey, something is wrong here. He first reached out to see who was managing that computer with TeamViewer. And when they realized that it was none of the authorized people, they sounded the alarm. Now, he also happened to be able to change the settings for the control plant so that it did not, put that high level of chemicals in the water. So luckily, because he was sitting there at that moment, he was able to avoid disaster. But if that person hadn't have been sitting there, who knows what would have happened. So the point of this story is that, first of all, you need to have a good plan to establish security controls and monitor and analyze those security controls to make sure that there aren't these critical level vulnerabilities like this. And then number two, you need to monitor the access of these systems at all times to see if there's any, unauthorized access. So the next example that I want to get into is Jones Day was broken into, their data was exfiltrated, they were hit with ransomware, and all of their data was posted online. This is a severe incident because the files that were posted were confidential legal case files, pieces of evidence, contractual agreements, statements by witnesses, things like that. So this is an extremely damaging incident, and it also happens to be the law firm that handles Donald Trump's lawsuits. So all of the different legal actions that he's been taking, are basically in the hands of these attackers, and some of them have been posted online. So the way that this happened was there was a vulnerability found in a file transfer application by Excellion. And this vulnerability is basically an SQL injection vulnerability. So once the attacker uses that SQL injection, they're able to launch a web shell called do mode. And so they basically were able to run remote commands in order to fetch data from within the FTA application, even though they had no authorized access to the system. Once they downloaded all of this data, they then sent out emails to Jones Day and other firms that they had attacked, and basically demanded that the companies either pay them a ransom or they're going to start releasing data. And so this is kind of a new approach to ransomware because as the clock ticks, they release more and more data, and the ransom goes up. So it's basically pay now or else, and there's a huge motivation to go ahead and do that so that they stop releasing your data, but there's no guarantee that they will. So once, I guess Jones Day refused to pay, the attackers published a large portion of the data, and, this is when the headlines came out, and everybody said, hey, there was this huge breach. So it looks like from the headlines perspective that it happened all of a sudden, but in actuality, these attackers had to first find this vulnerability in the file transfer application, and also they had to install this web shell to go in and be able to remotely take the files. And so this indicates the importance of monitoring network traffic, monitoring your applications that you use, and making sure that there are no sort of unauthorized accesses of critical systems like your file transfers. So one thing to mention about this case is it's continuing to develop to this day. So, many other firms have actually been hit, and not just law firms, but, I think the government of New Zealand was one that got attacked with this same vulnerability. The most recent story that I've seen is Shell Oil was breached using this vulnerability. So, the point there is it's important to always stay on top of all the latest vulnerabilities and to make sure that your environment is not open to these attacks. So, this attack has been known since February at the latest, because there's actually a couple of vulnerabilities that have been repaired. The latest one was February 1st. So this sort of underscores the importance of making sure you stay on top of all your vulnerabilities so that you don't get attacked with sort of known methods. So that's that one. And then the next one here is, I think we've all heard of this one, but I just want to go ahead and talk about this again because it's really a good example of an extremely sophisticated attack that tools would simply just never catch. And so it underscores the importance of security operations, constant monitoring, being able to process the data and understand what is happening in the environment. So the first stage of the FireEye breach was attackers gained access to a SolarWinds DevOps environment, and they were able to insert malicious code into the SolarWinds Orion product. Now, this didn't happen overnight. This was actually a long-term attack as well, because the attackers had such long-term access that they were actually able to run test code. So they ran some test code. They inserted some code into the Orion code base, and it didn't do anything. It basically just left a signature behind. And then the attackers analyzed the latest release from Orion, and they found that their code deployment had been successful. The signature was present. And so after they discovered that that was possible, they went ahead and inserted their Sunburst malware into the Orion code base. And then the next update of Orion, that malware rolled out to all customers who installed the update. The thing that's really insidious about this and potentially very damaging is that this file appeared to be a trusted, certified, signed application. There was no indication or no way for a customer to know that this is actually a piece of malware. It's not the tool that you think it is. It's got this malware installed in it. So the Sunburst malware, whenever it fires up, if they determine that this is a target machine or a target organization, it will then install Teardrop. And what Teardrop is basically a beacon that allows remote code execution. So it allows the remote control of the machine by the attacker. So they can send down instructions to the machine, and then those will get executed. And so what they did was they were able to use Teardrop to start harvesting credentials and sensitive data and sensitive tools. So then the final phase of this attack was actions on objectives. The attackers were able to exfiltrate the red team penetration tools from FireEye. And so they were detected finally as they were attempting to log into the VPN to, I guess, get further access and download more tools. When they attempted to log into the VPN, FireEye's Security Operations Center noticed that there was a new device attaching to the VPN, and they started analyzing the user that was connecting, and they found out that it was an impossible travel situation. The user was in two locations at once. And so because of their Security Operations Center, FireEye was able to catch this attack. And, even though it was so sophisticated, something that is interesting about this is that it wasn't just limited to FireEye, and thankfully FireEye did a great job. They were a great member of the security community because they investigated the issue and immediately released their findings and the threat intelligence around this issue. And so other security operations centers around the world were able to roll that threat intelligence into their platforms and detect, where this issue was present. With Arctic Wolf, we were able to instantly help our customers determine not only if they had this issue in their environment, but also exactly what devices had this installed. And so that's basically a quick summary of the FireEye attack. And with supply chain attacks like that, like I said, it's trusted software. You would never think that it's got malware in it. So it's really important to be constantly monitoring and looking for suspicious activity, even though it's not something that shows up in a signature or an obvious case like a antivirus detection. So now that we've reviewed some of those recent incidents, the next thing I'm going to go into is how Arctic Wolf can help. How can we help prevent these types of attacks from happening? And so the first thing for me to get into here is, what does the security operations approach actually entail? And I have lost my ability to see the slides again. But so when it comes to security operations, it's really the people, the processes, and the technology that are involved to continuously process all the security telemetry from the environment, and not just security telemetry, but also other data, just normal operational data like network traffic analysis and things of that nature. And so, broad visibility is really the first and most important aspect here. Being able to see all of the different data and all the different activity around the environment, regardless of what the source is. So, being able to see the network activity, being able to see Active Directory events, being able to see activity on the devices, having visibility into cloud services and being able to monitor those. It's important to get all those different angles included in the monitoring so that you can, immediately see what the blast radius is of an attack and how successful they were once they got sort of initial access. And the faster you can stop those things from happening, the less damage they can do in the environment. So broad visibility is key. 24/7 coverage, this one's pretty obvious, but most of the time the execution of attacks happen during working hours because they want the most damage to occur, and they want people to immediately panic and pay the ransom. But most of the time the initial intrusion is actually going to happen off hours. So where they first get, they first remote into the environment using a stolen credential. That's going to happen in off hours. So it's really important to have the 24/7 coverage. The next thing is access to expertise. There's a huge security talent shortage in the marketplace today. It's just really hard to find talented security analysts and engineers, and not only find them, but retain them. And so being able to, leverage a security operations center that gives you direct access to security experts is hugely important. The last two things here are actually kind of a combination. So in addition to just having access to the experts, it's also important to get strategic guidance from the security team that's monitoring your environment. And so with security operations, we're going to be able to tell you exactly what's going on and exactly which areas of the environment can be hardened. And that sort of rolls into continuous improvement. Over time, you need your security operations team to be able to tell you not only what's happening now and how you can improve your posture overall, but also to track that improvement and tell you what areas are going to give you the most return on investment. So you'll know that you've improved in X, Y, Z, but you need to invest more in A, B, C, that sort of thing. It's really important to have that continuous improvement because the methods that the attackers use are always changing. And no one tool or set of tools even is going to be able to block all these new evolving techniques. So I want to get just briefly into the technology behind how we do that. So I'll just sort of give you a quick overview here, and I hope this works. So are you guys able to see the Arctical platform slide?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I still cannot, so that's not good. But I'll just go on from my own notes here. So the way that we deliver this service is with a custom-built platform that we've created. It actually resides across 4 different security operations centers in terms of physical locations, but it's the software and the technology is hosted in the cloud. And so this platform can grow and expand as our demand does. And so it's auto-scaling and very high performance. We kind of took a different approach to this problem. A traditional approach for a SOC would be to, license a security information management system, or SIM, and then just use that off the shelf. But we knew that, in order to serve the amount of customers that we want to serve and to be affordable and to really make sense in terms of budgeting, we wouldn't be able to do that. It would make the cost just way too high. So we built our own platform from the ground up. And what we do is we leverage your existing investments. And this is going to be tricky because I'm not sure if the animations are going to work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take in the data from all the different security tools that you've already invested in. We do not come in and require you to use certain tools. We're vendor agnostic. So we have integrations with over 100 different tools out in the marketplace, from firewalls to antivirus, MFA systems, and we are going to just leverage what you've already invested in. This is a really big differentiator between things like XDR providers, where it's kind of a all or nothing solution. You have to use all of their tools. We are vendor agnostic. We bring in all that information, we analyze it in our SOCs, and we detect when there's security events. We rule out the false positives, and then we elevate issues that are true positives to you. And so that escalation and that support happens through what we call the concierge security team. So this is a layer on top of the SOC that is actually going to be able to help you through the remediation process whenever there are issues. And they're also going to be those security experts that you can leverage on a day-to-day basis. So they're going to provide the security expertise and the consultative sort of leadership to help you improve your environment at all times. So the content security team is not only responding when events happen, but they're also doing proactive work such as vulnerability assessments, threat hunting, as well as being there to run through all of your different security tools and analyze your security posture. And they'll sit down with customers and have regular meetings. It can either be monthly or quarterly, whatever the customer is comfortable with, and guide you through the process of not only having visibility to knowing what's happening in your environment, but also being able to improve your environment over time, whether it's investing in new tools or simply changing configurations or policies. So leveraging our platform and the concierge security team, we're able to deliver 2 services for you. And so these services are managed detection and response and managed risk. And each of those services has cloud add-ons that we call managed cloud monitoring. So with managed detection and response, the idea here is that we're going to be monitoring the environment 24/7 and looking for security breaches and looking for early indicators of those breaches so that we can stop them before they become damaging. And then with managed risk, we're going to be constantly scanning your environment, looking for any vulnerabilities, and helping you make sense of those vulnerabilities, prioritize them, and plan out projects to take care of them. Usually it's a very simple process. You just need to update your software. Well, I think we all know that it's not that easy. You have to plan around maintenance windows and all sorts of other things. So we can help you understand which vulnerabilities are the highest priority and which ones will be taken care of with certain projects. And then, of course, for each of those services, we can also connect to cloud sources such as Office 365, Google Workspace, AWS, Azure, and so on. And so that's included in the managed cloud monitoring. So that's a really quick and high-level overview of Arctic Wolf and the services we provide. But we would love to talk to you in the future and give you really an in-depth demo of all the details around these services. But for now, I think the next thing is we should go in and talk about some recent security wins. So hopefully the slides are working and you guys can see the recent win slide. But I'm going to hand it off to Steve at this point, and he can walk us through some win stories from within our Security Operations Center.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. This is probably one of my favorite things internally that I get to hear about. These security wins are sanitized stories on how our CST or SOC has helped our customers. And for the past 25 years prior to coming to Arctic Wolf, I was a practitioner doing what our customers, the prospects that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, are challenges they're dealing with. So I know firsthand the resource constrained teams that have to execute at a high level. And this is a boon for me because it doesn't really feel like a sales cycle. It feels like sharing the experience with a real business problem that we're solving for. So I've got about 5 stories here that are going to articulate some of the wins, everything from this one, business email compromise, to some other aspects around malware and other events. I think most people nowadays have either been affected by some level of business email compromise or know someone who has. In this specific instance, this was a retailer. The target of this, the attacker targeted the CFO, was able to leverage a password attack against their Office 365 tenant, get the CFO's password, and then start sending multi-factor flooding. So the customer actually had MFA in place on their tenant, which is a good thing. The problem was it was a push notification, and the CFO ended up clicking allow. So this got the attacker on, and then he started to proceed to create those inbox rules to kind of hide his tracks. So the pattern that was from a detection perspective was seeing the unsuccessful logins followed by a login from another country, by the way. Some of the other things that our concierge security team tries to understand about organizations is what is the business norm for them? Should we see access from other countries hitting your Office 365 tenant? And in some cases, that may be the case. In other cases, that may not be. But in this case, it was not. We should not have seen this activity coming from a different country. But then followed by inbox rule creation. So the CST engaged the escalation chain that was put together with the customer to stop the attack. So this wire transfer was thwarted, but it's a common thing since COVID hit. We see a lot of these things posing, spinning up lookalike domain names, posing as a financial higher up, and then requesting things like AR aging reports to get a hit list of all their customer bases, and then using COVID as a means to make a ACH account transfer. So I think some of the things that fell out of this as a lessons learned is working with the finance team in this case, really to make sure that they have controls around what that looks like for account changes, but also file transfers. Are you leveraging any kind of dual control approval process in those transfers, or what does that look like? So that's really kind of the takeaway there. Make sure that monitoring holistically your entire environment, but then also some of the intangibles that you can engage your finance team with to really try to mitigate this risk even without technical controls in place. This next one is a brute force. So this organization was going through an alias change, standardizing on formatting of their aliases. So there's a little bit of chaos in the environment, but we did see several failed login attempts, kind of a low and slow attack over the course of a time period, and then successful login. So the indicators here were challenging because a lot of those low and slow, when users change their password, oftentimes the very next day, they forget. So we'll see a potential failed login attempt, and which really doesn't necessarily indicate a security event in and of it by itself. But coupled with a couple other things, we reached out and say, hey, we're seeing this on an alias named help desk. Is this normal? And then the customer came back and said, no, this user was termed 90 days ago. So a lot of what this low and slow thing can do is it's very hard to detect too, like password sprays or password guessing attacks, where if an attacker get a foothold, they'll enter a net view, dump your password policy from the domain, and then really dump or enumerate all the users in your environment and create, let's say if your account threshold was 4 or lockout threshold was 4, create 2 passwords in that, and then iterate through every single user trying those 2 passwords for logging onto an IPC share, for example, for your domain controller. So these can be very hard, and you can adjust these so that they're very slow, but very hard to detect, and they're very effective, by the way, as well. So a couple things that came out of this as a lessons learned was the customer had both onboarding processes in play and then termination processes in play, but this was a gap. They missed this one. And this account was left open. The other thing that came out of this was not only was this account left open, but the account was set to never lock out. So a couple of lessons learned here. We shorted up and got them a process to do kind of a user audit, if you will. This next one was more of a malware attack. So this was from a routine like threat hunt that Tom kind of mentioned, where the CST saw an actual alert from the endpoint tool that was deployed in the environment. So the endpoint alerted on the malware that was downloaded. However, the payload that was downloaded had the ability to disable the antivirus. So the follow-up event from that payload, that first stage of the payload, was to disable the antivirus, and then as the second stage was reach out to download another payload. Well, in this instance specifically, the customer had the Arctic Wolf agent, so we have an agent that we can deploy in the environment, which gives us the ability to host isolation rather. So containment, if you will. And this was a remote site, so the customer didn't have easy access to it. So we were able to contain that host using the Arctic Wolf agent to isolate it from the network until the customer had a chance to reach out and remediate the device. So it mitigated the lateral movement of that payload and that malicious activity. So it was real quick response. We also did see another indicator of another machine in that. So likely a drive-by download in this instance, but swift containment measures there, as you can see, and then isolation so the lateral movement gets mitigated. This is another malware infection. This is unique too because it's we do see a lot of when we deploy our sensors out at locations, depending on whether you're going span or in line from a sensor deployment, we see a lot of traffic leaving the environment that are indicators of things like command and control or beaconing of some kind out in the environment. So in this specific case, it was an existing customer working with their concierge security team to ramp up a new site. So this was a new site for the organization. Had the meetings. When you get the sensors from us, they're pre-configured. So it's really just a cabling exercise and a racking exercise. Well, as the customer was still in there racking and cabling and getting the cables all nice and neat, we saw beaconing. The CST saw beaconing, command and control beaconing from 3 devices in that environment. So the escalation chain reached out to the customer, told him about the beaconing. Since he was out there, obviously able to collect the laptops and do remediation on those. So the other thing, the gap here as well was that those they had to put it in a policy around workstation deployments around endpoint. So standardization, the endpoint tools weren't deployed to those 3 assets in the environment. So call out there. And then this last one that I have for you, is based around a healthcare company that was doing a gap assessment or how, having an auditor in to review how they're mapping to certain controls in their framework. So the auditor came in, requested a privileged account for testing. And the customer, when you go, part of the onboarding process is to identify like group changes. So a lot of customers will leverage groups to manage like VPN access, or the common ones are like domain admins, schema admins, enterprise admins. But a lot of customers will do custom groups to focus around areas to give you access. In this case, it was to their electronic medical record system. So they had several groups that managed various roles and privilege in that EMR system. So what we did see is that the auditor was assigning himself to these privileged groups. The CST saw that, alerted on that, reached out to the customer, notified the customer. The customer explained that there was an auditor in. A couple things that came out of this policy was there was a policy in place or a process in place internally to gain access or get privileged access to these groups, which would have been known about ahead of time. So the CST called the customer engaged the auditor, they disabled the account, and then they engaged the auditor, told them, hey, we saw you adding to these groups. That's a no-no. Well, anyway, there was a policy later on that the auditor kind of validated and said, yep, okay, you check the box here. So really, the goal of this is some of these things can seem small at times, but very actionable, especially when you're a constrained team and it's hard to get your grasp around some of these alerts when you're doing so many other things. So, and that's the last one I had for you. I think we were going to end with possible questions here.
Yeah, and we've had a few come in, and Steve, I guess we could get you to start. Kind of a general question that I think you guys might get a lot is, do you replace a SIM?
We do. Oftentimes, Tom, I can take this unless you want to add to it, but oftentimes they're redundant. So it becomes a return on investment kind of dialogue where, it depends on whether they're using it for operational aspects, maybe more up-down kind of situations, or leveraging some of their infrastructure components. But oftentimes it's a replacement, full-on replacement, because as Tom mentioned, that SIM and AWS is really the replacement for that. And we're trying to own the outcome for our customers so that it becomes redundant in the cost savings long-term.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Steve. And one thing I would just mention also is that if the customer does have an existing SIM, we can typically take the syslog forwarding from that SIM and just relay it over to our system. And so that way, we can monitor the data at the same time as their SIM is collecting it. But, as Steve mentioned, it usually just becomes a cost-benefit analysis, and customers tend to find with us that they no longer need to have the SIM.
All right, we got another question around incident response and how Arctic Wolf charges for it.
Yeah, sure, I'll take that one. So with Arctic Wolf, we have a 5-minute response time SLA for incident response. And so you call Arctic Wolf, and you'll either get your concierge security team member on the phone, or they'll call you back in less than 5 minutes. So unlike some other companies, we do not charge or limit incident response. It's just included in the service. And what we'll do is we'll look at all the telemetry that we're collecting. We'll work with you live on the phone. We'll send up a screen sharing session if we need to, and we can look over each other's shoulders. Your concierge security team will help work through that incident. And we'll do as much as we can from a remote perspective.
Nice.
And I think, and if I could just add one more thing, that from a ticketing perspective, in our portal, you get the full root cause with remediation guidance. So, and just to Tom's point, we're not lobbing the incident over the fence. and then saying good luck with that. So we want to get to a steady state of going forward from a triage perspective as well. So we're going to work with you to solve that issue.
Yeah, and that might be a good segue into another question we got is around implementation and what, if we can call a typical implementation, what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. I can take that real quick. So with Arctic Wolf, we have a team that is 100% focused on implementation. We call it our onboarding team. And so when a customer signs up with us, they typically get between 30 to 45 days to get everything up and running. So this is a very short time to value in comparison with the practice of maybe standing up your own SIM, which can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get it fully tuned and operationalized. With Arctic Wolf, we assign you that onboarding team, and you get the benefit of the fact that we've integrated with so many different tools, and we've already got the parsers, the threat intelligence, the escalations. We've already got all that stuff built in. So the onboarding team will get everything pre-configured for you. They'll ship everything out that you need in terms of hardware. They'll give you an installer for the agent, and we try to make it as simple as possible. And so we allocate that 30 to 45-day period really just so we can plan everything out and make sure that it works within your schedule to get everything rolled out.
Steve, anything else on that piece?
I don't. I'd say well said. I mean, it's a relatively low lift for most customers, and you get a pretty decent maturity uptick in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and I'll add to that I hear often, and I think some of the Arctic Wolf salespeople do a good job of kind of representing this, is that typically with a SIM and or a service like this, you often hear of kind of ticket or notification overload, right? Where it's, hey, I'm getting pinged about every single little thing, and then it becomes kind of fatigue, right? Where you don't know what's real and what's not because you're getting so many tickets. And I think one thing our clients at least see value in, and we've heard from customers ourselves, is that Arctic Wolf's job is not to send you every ticket. It's in fact trying to limit the noise, right? And I guess, guys, you could jump in here too, but I think the point being is that best case scenario is you don't hear anything, and that's not because there's nothing to hear, but the threat level is not high enough to be designated as something to notify, right? So I think that's a pretty cool feature, because I know a lot of our users tend to almost get overwhelmed with the amount of data and or tickets that cross their email, whether it be real or not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say you're absolutely right. That was, the biggest solve for us is trying to own that outcome for our customers so they don't have to. Obviously, you don't have to be a security expert to engage Arctic Wolf. A lot of our customers are, traditional infrastructure people who have been tasked with, oh, by the way, now you have to manage security. So that's really the solve, where we're trying to help own it and own that outcome for our customers so that they don't have to take on that triage event.
Yeah, and that wraps up the questions. I think, here's one question that I think you touched on, Steve, just based on your last slide, of another kind of core area that we believe Arctic Wolf kind of helps with is, I would venture to guess the large majority of customers or clients on this meeting today have some level of audits, whether that's HIPAA, PCI, or whatever the kind of industry specific audit is. And something that you might have touched on, but I'll give you maybe another minute to touch on it, is how your CST team, and I guess the organization itself, can help customers navigate through that, because it's a pain in the butt. Everyone, it's typically a requirement, and it's always a painful process, but I know that's a selling point for some folks that your team can help. Maybe if you don't mind touching on that for 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, not at all. From a compliance standpoint, it's probably one of our biggest verticals, just by the nature of what we're doing, monitoring those logs and taking action from a incident response perspective. So from our CST's perspective, a lot of what they're doing, whether it's a cybersecurity framework alignment with the customer. So if they're a HIPAA organization, then we'll provide controls or artifacts of compliance on how we're helping fulfill those controls. And a lot of our reports kind of, whether it's proactive. So let's say you have an auditor that's coming in to do some kind of gap analysis or an audit of some kind, and they want to know where we're fulfilling those controls. We put together reports proactively to address the controls that we're fulfilling the need for. Also, if we know ahead of time, oftentimes our CSTs get on with auditors to walk through that process on how we handle escalation chains, how we handle, monitoring network telemetry, how we manage group management changes for our organization. So a lot of what we do is compliance focused. And whether it's cybersecurity framework like HIPAA or PCI to things like just basic third-party questionnaires. A lot of customers nowadays are doing a lot of vendor due diligence around their vendors. So we're seeing a lot of upticks in need around helping fulfill some of the needs around those third-party compliance questionnaires.
So we got a couple more questions that came in. So I think we have a few more minutes. The question is, within the 5-minute contact window, is that contact made by email, phone, text? And if no response, do they move from first person onto the contact list before moving to the next form or contact? So I think the question is, what are the methods of contact? And, is there, so to speak, a run book as to if one contact's not available, what happens?
Yeah,
for sure. So I'll just take that one, Steve. So first of all, if a customer calls us, so if it initiates with the customer, then we're either going to pick up the phone or call them back within 5 minutes. If there's an issue that we detect, we can either send them an email or call certain people or do a combination of those things. We also create escalation rules depending on the type of incident. So our customers can talk to their concierge teams and create escalation rules that make sense for their organization. You might have one person who handles, authentication, and maybe whenever someone gets phished, you want us to reach out to that person. We can set up different escalation rules for different incidents, and that can also be based on, the time of day, the location, the users involved, the devices involved. It's very, very customizable. And the last thing I'll mention is that, yes, we definitely have multiple steps of escalation. So if we have a phone number to call for step 1, we'll call that person, and if they don't answer, we'll move on to step 2 and call that person. And that can, you can have as many escalations as you want. We can move all the way up to the CEO if you want to. It's really just up to the customer and what your policies, how your policies align with our escalation rules.
And I think just to add one more thing is that one of the nice things from my perspective, being a former client, is that you have the ability to kind of tailor how you want to engage as opposed to you having to conform to the product or solution that we're providing. So we're going to try to customize as much of these aspects to tailor to your needs as possible. So in the escalation chain is definitely one of those.
Cool. Last question as of now. Is there a feature that allows administrators to block sign-in on an endpoint or possibly remove the data remotely?
So
that's a good question. So Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say not currently. What we do at the endpoint is the host isolation. So in the event that we saw a specific admin, we are looking for specific things around local user accounts as well. So depending on the use case there, what we'd be able to do is do host isolation to mitigate that risk, and then reach out to perform account lockouts or disabling of accounts with the team.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there that, because of our own compliance requirements and the sort of wall of separation between our access to your environment. So, see, we collect a lot of security telemetry, but we don't remote in and move around within your environment. And that prevents us from getting access to sensitive data and all the things that you wouldn't want a third party to have access to. So we will isolate the machine using our agent. We basically send it a command, and it blocks all traffic in and out. And that would stop like a data exfiltration event or something of that nature. So we isolate the machine and then provide the remote support to remediate the issue before we actually release that containment.
So I hope that answered the question. And if there's a follow-up question, feel free to post it. But that is all of the questions. So that being said, we're at about 1:50 Eastern time. We appreciate you guys joining. You can see here the slide is essentially a summary of Arctic Wolf and Opkalla. And, as kind of the closing here, I think I mentioned you will see an email from an Opkalla salesperson within the next 24 hours. We'll also assign the winners of the smoker, Nespresso machine, and Nintendo Switch. So if you're one of the winners, you'll get an email saying, hey, congrats, you won. But that being said, we hope you found it productive. This is certainly, maybe at least from the Opkalla side, one of the most talked about topics for our customers. We hope you found that this is valuable, and this could potentially add a layer of security to your organization itself. But for any questions or concerns or follow-ups for that matter, we'll give you the means to reach out, and we hope we could talk to you individually as well. And I think that's it. So thank you all for joining again. We hope you found it productive, and we'll give everyone about 9 minutes back of their day.
Thanks, everybody.